There was a night, not long ago, when a man sat alone on the floor of his small rented room, staring at a stack of unpaid bills, his hands trembling, his heart heavier than it had ever been. He whispered one sentence into the darkness that changed the entire direction of his life. He said, "Ya Allah, I don't know how, but I trust you." He didn't know it yet, but within 30 days, everything about his life would shift in a way no bank, no boss, and no business plan could ever explain. If you are watching this right now because your pocket feels empty, because your dreams feel distant, because you've prayed and waited and wondered if you've been forgotten, stay with me for the next few minutes, because what you are about to hear is not another motivational cliche. It is a reminder of something so powerful that once it settles into your heart, you will never look at your struggle the same way again. We live in a world that has convinced us that provision is something we manufacture entirely through our own effort, our own intelligence, our own connections. And yes, effort matters. We will talk about that too, because sitting and doing nothing while calling it faith is not faith. It is laziness wearing a spiritual costume. But there is a deeper truth that so many people have forgotten in the noise of hustle culture and comparison and burnout. And that truth is this: your rizq, your sustenance, your provision, was already written for you before you took your first breath. It is not hiding somewhere waiting to be discovered by luck. It is not locked behind a door that only the privileged can open. It has an appointed time, and it has an appointed way of arriving, and sometimes that way arrives overnight, in a manner so unexpected that you are left standing in disbelief, wondering how you ever doubted. Think about the last time you felt completely stuck. Maybe it's happening right now. Maybe you've applied for job after job and heard nothing but silence. Maybe your business feels like it's bleeding instead of growing. Maybe you look at your bank balance and feel a tightness in your chest that you don't even want to admit to the people closest to you. That feeling of being stuck is not a sign that you are unworthy. It is not proof that you are cursed or forgotten. Often, it is simply the quiet space before a door opens, the pause before the shift, the darkest part of the night right before the first light breaks the sky. The problem is that most people give up exactly one night before their breakthrough, because they mistake the silence for rejection instead of preparation. Let me tell you something that will sit with you long after this video ends. There is a difference between provision and perception. Your perception tells you that if something hasn't happened yet, it never will. Your perception tells you that if you don't see movement today, there is no movement happening at all. But provision, on your timeline, it works on a timeline that is already written, already measured, already perfectly placed, even when it feels chaotic and cruel from where you're standing. The version of you a year from now, sitting comfortably, providing for the people you love, walking with a peace you don't currently have, will look back at this exact moment of struggle and understand exactly why it had to happen this way. But that understanding almost never comes while you're in the middle of it. It only after. I want you to imagine two people standing at the edge of the same storm. One of them is convinced the storm will destroy him. He curls into fear. He complains to everyone who will listen. He begins to resent the people around him who seem to have it easier, and slowly, that resentment poisons every decision he makes afterward. The other person, standing in the exact same storm, facing the exact same uncertainty, chooses a different posture. Not because he is naive, not because he pretends the pain isn't real, but because he understands something the first man doesn't. He understands that the storm is not the end of his story. It is simply the chapter before the turning point. He lowers his head, not in defeat, but in surrender, and he says, "I will do what is within my power, and I will trust what is beyond it." That single shift in posture is often the exact difference between a person who stays stuck for years and a person whose situation transforms overnight. Here's something most people never talk about, something that might make you uncomfortable, but discomfort is often where the real growth begins. Sometimes delay is not punishment. Sometimes delay is protection. There have been moments in your life, if you're honest with yourself, where you desperately wanted something and it didn't come, and later, much later, you realized that if it had come exactly when you wanted it, it would have destroyed you. Maybe that job you didn't get would have trapped you in a place that slowly crushed your spirit. Maybe that deal that fell through would have tied you to people who eventually would have brought you down with them. What feels like rejection in the moment is sometimes the most loving redirection you will ever receive. And when you finally understand that the one who controls your provision sees the entire map of your life, while you can only see the small square you're standing on, something inside you begins to soften. The anxiety starts to lose its grip. Not because your circumstances changed yet, but because your understanding did. Now let's talk about something practical, because faith without action is a beautiful sentiment that changes nothing in the real world. If you genuinely want to open the doors of provision in your life, there are patterns that have repeated themselves throughout history in the lives of people who went from nothing to abundance. And these patterns are not secrets, they are simply overlooked, because they require something modern culture has trained us to avoid: consistency, humility, and patience. The first pattern is gratitude, not the shallow kind you post online for likes, but the kind that shows up in your private moments, when no one is watching, when you whisper thanks for the roof over your head even while you're praying for more, when you appreciate the meal in front of you even while working toward a bigger table. There is something almost mathematical about gratitude and increase. The people who complain the most about what they don't have are often the same people who never notice what they already do have, and that blindness becomes a ceiling they build with their own hands. The second pattern is generosity, and this one confuses people because it seems backward. How can giving away what little you have possibly to more? Think a farmer. If a farmer looks at his last handful of seeds and decides to hoard them out of fear, protecting them in a locked box because they're all he has left, those seeds will rot useless, wasted, accomplishing nothing. But if that same farmer, even in his scarcity, plants those seeds into the ground, trusting a process he cannot see happening beneath the soil, something remarkable occurs. The very thing he was most afraid to lose becomes the thing that multiplies into a harvest far greater than what he started with. Your resources, your time, your kindness, your money work the same way. When you give from a place of trust rather than fear, when you help someone even while you yourself are struggling, you are not losing, you are planting. And what is planted in sincerity rarely fails to grow, even if the growth takes longer than you'd like. The third pattern is discipline in the unseen hours. Everyone wants the overnight transformation, but almost no one wants the nights before it that required waking up when it was still dark, praying when no one was there to see it, working quietly on a skill while others were asleep or scrolling through other people's highlight reels. There is a reason the phrase, overnight success, is almost always a lie when you look closely at someone's real story. What looks sudden to the outside world was usually being built in silence for months or years before it became visible. The overnight increase in provision that people talk about is rarely random. It is usually the exact moment when preparation finally meets opportunity, and that collision can feel instantaneous, even though the preparation took far longer than anyone saw. Let me bring you back to that man from the beginning of this speech, sitting on the floor with his bills scattered around him. What happened after that whispered prayer wasn't magic in the sense of something appearing out of thin air with no explanation. What happened was a sequence of small events that, looked at individually, seemed insignificant, but together formed a complete transformation. He decided that same night that despite his exhaustion, he would not let his current situation define his character. He got up the next morning, and instead of complaining to his friends about his misfortune, he reached out to someone he had been avoiding out of pride, someone he owed an apology to, and mended a relationship he had let rot for months. That same week, that person, moved by his humility, mentioned his name to someone else, someone who happened to be looking for exactly the skill set he had been quietly developing for the past 2 years, without any recognition. Within days, an opportunity arrived that he hadn't applied for, hadn't networked his way into through calculated strategy, hadn't manufactured through sheer force of will. It arrived because he had been planting seeds of character and skill for years, and the storm he was standing in was simply the moment those seeds finally broke through the soil. This is the part where I need to be completely honest with you, because false hope is just as dangerous as no hope at all. Not every difficulty resolves in 30 days. Not every prayer is answered on the timeline we demand. Some of you watching this are in the middle of a trial that has lasted years, not weeks, and I am not here to tell you that if you simply say the right words tonight, you'll wake up tomorrow with your bank account full. That is not how this works, and anyone who tells you it is has never actually walked through real hardship themselves. What I am telling you is something more solid than a quick fix. I am telling you that your current struggle is not evidence of your worthlessness, that delay is not the same as denial, and that the posture you hold during the waiting is often what determines the shape of what eventually arrives. Bitterness during the wait tends to attract more of the same, but sincerity, effort, and trust during the wait tend to be met, eventually, with something that makes the entire delay make sense in hindsight. I want you to think about your own life for a moment, honestly, without performing for anyone. Where have you been asking for increase while simultaneously closing the doors that could lead to it? Where have you been praying for provision while refusing to take the uncomfortable action that provision often requires? Sometimes we want the harvest without ever admitting we haven't planted anything in months. Sometimes we want the door to open while we're leaning our full weight against it, keeping it shut ourselves through fear, through pride, through the refusal to ask for help, through the refusal to change a habit that has clearly stopped serving us. Real transformation requires an uncomfortable kind of honesty, the kind that looks in the mirror and asks, "What am I doing, or not doing, that is standing between me and the life I say I want?" There is a particular kind of pain that comes from watching other people succeed while you feel stagnant. Maybe you scroll through your phone and see someone your age buying a house while you're still counting coins for groceries. Maybe you see someone with less skill than you landing opportunities that seem to bypass you entirely. That pain is real, and I am not going to insult you by telling you to simply stay positive and ignore it. But here is something that might shift how you experience that pain. Comparison, when left unchecked, becomes a slow poison that convinces you that provision is a competition with a limited supply, that someone else's increase somehow means less is available for you. But provision does not work like a pie with a fixed number of slices. Someone else's overnight increase does not subtract from yours. In fact, sometimes watching someone else break through is not meant to torture you. It is meant to show you what is possible, a preview of a door that is about to open in your own life if you can shift your focus from resentment to belief. Let's talk about patience for a moment, because it has become almost a forbidden word in a culture obsessed with instant results. Patience is not passivity. Patience is not sitting still and waiting for the sky to rain money on you while you do nothing to prepare for it. True patience is active. It looks like continuing to show up, continuing to work on yourself, continuing to refine your character and your skill, even when there is no visible proof yet that any of it is working. It is the ability to keep planting seeds in soil that hasn't shown a single sprout, trusting a process you cannot see with your eyes, but can sense is happening beneath the surface. The people who eventually experience sudden, dramatic increase in their provision are almost always the people who were quietly, faithfully the right things during the season when nothing seemed to be happening. The invisible work is never wasted. It compounds silently until one day it becomes visible all at once, and to everyone watching from the outside, it looks like it happened overnight. I want to address something that many people carry as a hidden weight, something they rarely say out loud. There is a quiet shame that comes with financial struggle, a feeling that somehow your worth as a person is tied to the number in your account. If you have felt that shame, I need you to hear this clearly. Your current financial situation is not a verdict on your value as a human being. Some of the most sincere, hardworking, generous people in history have gone through seasons of deep scarcity, not because they were being punished, but because that scarcity was shaping something in them that abundance never could have. Struggle has a way of stripping away everything false, everything performative, everything built on ego, until what remains is who you actually are underneath it all. That refined version of you, the one being forged in the discomfort you're currently in, is often exactly who needs to exist before the increase arrives, because provision handed to an unprepared, unrefined character rarely lasts. It slips through fingers that were never trained to hold it properly. So what do you actually do with all of this? How do you move from simply understanding these ideas to living them in a way that changes your actual circumstances? It starts with a decision made today, right now, while you're watching this, that you will stop outsourcing your peace to your bank balance. Your peace has to come first, rooted in trust, before the external circumstances shift. Otherwise, even when increase comes, you'll still feel empty, still chasing the next number, still convinced that happiness is one more achievement away. Then it requires an honest audit of your habits. Are you working with excellence? Are you doing the bare minimum and blaming the outcome on bad luck? Are you treating people around you with generosity? Or have you become so focused on your own lack that you've stopped noticing anyone else's needs? Are you praying with real presence? Or are you rushing through empty motions while your mind is somewhere else entirely? Then it requires taking one uncomfortable action this week, not next month, not when things calm down, but this week. Maybe that action is reaching out to someone you've been avoiding. Maybe it's finally starting the project you've been overthinking for a year. Maybe it's admitting to yourself that the path you've been on isn't working and you need to humble yourself enough to learn something new. Increase rarely arrives in the middle of comfort. It arrives in the space right after courage, the space right after you finally do the thing you've been too afraid or too proud to do. I think about that man on the floor again, and I think about how close he came to giving up entirely that night. How many of us have stood exactly where he stood, one decision away from either sinking into despair or standing up and taking one more step? The difference between the people whose stories end in defeat and the people whose stories become testimonies that inspire others is rarely talent, and it's rarely luck. It's almost always this: they refused to let one hard night convince them their entire story was over. They understood, somewhere deep in their chest, that the current chapter is not the final chapter, that the door that feels permanently shut right now might swing open the moment they stop pounding on it out of desperation and start walking forward in quiet, steady trust. If you are in a season of waiting right now, I want you to hold on to something. The exact thing you are praying for might be closer than you think. It might be one conversation away, one act of courage away, one moment of humility away, one night of sincere surrender away. You do not know what tomorrow holds, and neither did that man sitting on his floor with nothing but a whispered prayer and a trembling heart. What you do know is this: you are still here, still breathing, still capable of taking one more step, and that alone means your story is not finished. Provision that has been written for you cannot be stolen by anyone, cannot be blocked by anyone's jealousy, cannot be delayed forever by any circumstance beyond a set and measured time. What is meant for you will find its way to you, often through paths you never expected, often overnight, in a way that leaves you standing in awe, wondering how you ever doubted it would come. There is another story worth sitting with, one about a woman who spent 3 years applying for opportunities that never came through, watching her savings shrink while her confidence shrank alongside it. Every rejection letter felt like confirmation of a fear she had carried since childhood, the fear that she simply wasn't enough, that some people were destined for ease, while others were destined to struggle no matter how hard they tried. She reached a point where she almost stopped trying altogether, not out of laziness, but out of exhaustion, the kind of exhaustion that comes from hoping too many times and being disappointed too many times. But something small shifted in her one evening. Instead of asking, "Why hasn't this happened for me yet?" she began asking a different question. "What is this season trying to teach me that I haven't learned yet?" That single reframe didn't change her bank account overnight, but it changed her posture, and posture, over time, changes everything else. She started using the time she used to spend refreshing job boards to instead build something of her own, something small, something she almost dismissed as unimportant. Within a year, that small thing became the very source of an increase she had spent 3 years praying for through completely different means. The path rarely looks the way we imagine it will. It rarely arrives through the door we've been staring at. It often arrives through a window we never even noticed was open, precisely because we were too fixated on the door. This is why fixation can quietly become a trap. When you become obsessed with one specific outcome, one specific job, one specific person's approval, one specific timeline, you narrow your vision so much that you become blind to every other door that might be opening around you. Provision rarely announces itself in advance. It rarely sends you a formal invitation telling you exactly when and how it's going to arrive. It often shows up disguised as an inconvenience, a delay, a rejection, a chance encounter you almost dismissed as meaningless small talk. The people who receive it are often the people who stayed open, who kept their eyes up instead of down, who didn't collapse into tunnel vision the moment their first plan failed. Let's talk honestly about fear, because fear is the quiet architect behind so many of our stuck seasons. Fear convinces you to play smaller than you're capable of. Fear convinces you to stay in situations that drain you because at least they're familiar, and familiar feels safer than uncertain, even when familiar is slowly destroying you. Fear whispers that if you take the leap, if you start the business, if you ask for the raise, if you walk away from what no longer serves you, everything will collapse and you'll be left with nothing. But here's what fear never tells you. Staying stagnant out of fear doesn't actually protect you from loss. It simply guarantees a slower, quieter loss, the loss of years, the loss of potential, the loss of the version of yourself who could have existed if you had trusted enough to move. The people who experience sudden increase in their lives are rarely the people who felt no fear. They are the people who felt the fear completely, fully, honestly, and moved anyway, because they understood that comfort and growth cannot occupy the same space at the same time. I also want to talk about the danger of a scarcity mindset, because it shapes far more of our decisions than most people realize. When you constantly operate from a place of "there's not enough," you start making decisions rooted in panic instead of wisdom. You hoard instead of invest. You isolate instead of build relationships. You say yes to things that drain you because you're terrified of losing the little you have, even when saying no would open space for something far greater to arrive. Scarcity mindset doesn't just affect your money, it infects your relationships, your creativity, your willingness to take healthy risks. Breaking free from it doesn't mean pretending you have more than you do. It means trusting that the source of your provision is not your own limited effort alone, and that trust frees you to make decisions from a place of calm wisdom instead of desperate panic. Desperation has a way of repelling the very things we're chasing, while calm, grounded confidence has a way of attracting them. Consider, too, the role of company in your life, because who you surround yourself with shapes the ceiling of what you believe is possible for yourself. If everyone around you is complaining, settling, and convinced that struggle is simply their permanent identity, you will absorb that belief whether you intend to or not. But when you place yourself, even occasionally, near people who are disciplined, who are hopeful, who are actively building, rather than endlessly complaining, something in you begins to recalibrate. You start to believe that transformation is possible because you're watching it happen in front of you, in real time, in people who are not fundamentally different from you. This is not about abandoning people in hard seasons. It is about being intentional about who you let speak into your deepest beliefs about what your future can hold. Let's return one more time to the idea of the overnight shift, because I want you to understand it clearly, not as a fantasy, but as a real and repeated pattern in the lives of people who walked through genuine hardship and came out the other side. The overnight shift is rarely about the universe randomly deciding to bless one person over another. It is about a convergence, a moment when sincere effort, sincere character, sincere trust, and a long season of quiet preparation finally meet an open door. From the outside, it looks instantaneous, dramatic, almost unbelievable. From the inside, if you could see the full story, you would see months or years of small, unnoticed decisions that built toward that single moment. This means the season you are in right now, the one that feels slow, uneventful, maybe even embarrassing compared to where you thought you'd be by now, might be the exact season being used to prepare the very overnight shift you are praying for. Nothing is wasted. Nothing done with integrity, even in silence, even with no audience, disappears without purpose. So tonight, or whenever you're watching this, I want you to do something. I want you to stop scrolling for a moment, close your eyes, and let go of the tight grip you've been holding on your own timeline. Whisper your own version of that sentence, "I don't know how, but I trust this will come." Not as a passive surrender to laziness, but as an active declaration that you will keep working, keep showing up, keep being generous even in your lack, keep waking up before the world does, and you will let go of the anxiety that has been suffocating your peace for far too long. Because the increase you're waiting for is not lost. It is not forgotten. It is written, it is coming, and when it arrives, it may very well arrive overnight, transforming in a single night what felt like years of struggle, leaving you with a story you'll tell for the rest of your life about the night everything changed. Stand up. Take the step you've been avoiding. Your breakthrough is closer than you think, and it starts the moment you decide to stop waiting for permission to believe it.